So those of you who don't know our moderator tonight, I'll get us started because we want to start on time and get rolling. And I think Reverend Johnnie Moore is the perfect host for this evening's conversation between Rabbi Lamm and Bishop Stearns. Reverend Moore is an evangelical Christian leader who's best known for his consequential work at the intersection of faith and foreign policy in the Middle East. In 2020, just really this year, he was named one of America's 10 most influential religious leaders. He is the president of the Congress of Christian Leaders, serves on the ADL's Task Force for Middle East Minorities, and is the youngest ever recipient of the Simon Wiesenthal Center's prestigious Medal of Valor Prize for his efforts in rescuing Christians from ISIS in 2015. He's also the commissioner on the bipartisan U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom, appointed by the President of the United States. And Johnny, thank you so much for hosting us tonight, and we'll let you take it away from here.
Thank you, Rabbi Weinberg, and thanks to everyone watching us everywhere. Those who are participating in the Zoom format that we're in here natively, and all of those watching us live across social media, and those who will watch us later. When you share this to your friends and family. There are many things we could address in tonight's compelling conversation. But we've chosen a very, very important topic. It's not a political topic, and so I'm sorry to disappoint some of you, who have been obsessed with either Fox News or CNN, depending upon or something else. We're going to talk about something much, much more important than politics, much more important than almost any cultural discussion taking place in our country or whatever country you end up watching this in. Tonight, we're talking about gratitude. And we could not have two greater leaders to facilitate, that I have the privilege of facilitating this dialogue with on the subject of gratitude. One Christian and one Jewish, and I'll introduce them both. Bishop Robert Stearns, a friend of mine, is the founder and executive director of Eagle's Wings. He's ministered in 30 nations all around the world. He's become one of the leading Christian advocates for Israel, not just in the United States, but in many countries around the world. He's an author. He leads as the presiding bishop of the historic Full Gospel Tabernacle in Orchard Park. He also is the founder and creator of an annual day of prayer for the peace of Jerusalem, which hundreds of thousands of churches participate in more than 150 countries around the world. And of course, Rabbi Ari Lamm, who our Jewish participants know, and I'm pleased to introduce our Christian viewers to, is the scion of one of America's leading rabbinic families. He's the visionary behind the Joshua Project, which facilitates our compelling conversation tonight. He was ordained at the historic Isaac Elkanan Theological Seminary. His doctorate is in the history of Judaism and Christianity from Princeton. That means he knows more about Christianity than both the bishop and I do, for sure. And he served as a special advisor for many years to the president of Yeshiva University, the country's largest Jewish institution for higher education. Of course, he speaks everywhere, like the bishop, to incredibly enlightened individuals. And since the rabbi came first in this great story of our Judeo-Christian partnership, I'm going to pose the same question to the two of you, but I'll let you answer first, Rabbi, which is, can you talk to us for a second about gratitude in Judaism, and then we'll flip the coin and we'll have the bishop respond to the same question.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Reverend, for bringing us both, convening us both together. I feel like the three of us should just walk into a bar and just complete the punchline. But in any event, Jewish Hebrew biblical perspective on gratitude, I always think about a character that actually this very week, Jews across the world are going to read about in their weekly Torah reading, in their weekly biblical reading, is the matriarch Leah. She's one of the key and righteous people in the book of Genesis. She's married to Jacob, and she is she's the mother of several of the tribes of the Israelites. And perhaps the most interesting event that she experiences over the course of raising these children who would eventually become the Israelites is when she has her fourth child. Her fourth child is named Judah. And Judah is famous both in Judaism as the ancestor of King David, in the Christian tradition as the ancestor of Joseph, and ultimately the lineage from which Jesus is said to descend. And Judah is this fascinating figure. And I want to focus in particular on his name. So why is he named Judah? So if you read the King James Bible, right, so it says that Leah says when she has Judah, and now, this time I shall thank the Lord, and therefore she called his name Judah, which sounds like a non sequitur, and it is a non sequitur in English. In Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew, it's actually a wonderful play on words, because the Hebrew word, the ancient Hebrew word that Leah uses to say thank you to God is the word odeh, which is a form of the Hebrew word hoda'ah, which means to thank. And the name Judah in Hebrew, Yehudah, is also a form of the word to thank. And so Judah's name quite literally means thank you. Now, the ancient rabbis have this fascinating tradition that I've been captivated by for years, which seems almost impossible to understand. And the ancient Jewish tradition in the Talmud says that Leah was actually the first person in all of history to thank God. The reason they say that is because this is actually the first time in the Bible that the word thank you actually appears. But that always floored me. It was the first person ever to say thank you. I mean, no one even said it by accident in the entire history of the world since creation. My grandfather and teacher, Rabbi Norman Lamm, one of the preeminent Jewish leaders of the 20th century, really, I think the greatest Jewish orator in 100 years. I know I'm not alone in sharing that assessment. I'm obviously a very biased party. But my grandfather, Rabbi Norman Lamm, had this wonderful comment on this strange tradition that Leah was the first person to thank God. He said there are actually two forms of gratitude. There's a lower form and a higher form. The lower form is gratitude as compensation. When you say thank you because you got something, it's sort of like an emotional or a verbal receipt, right? So someone does something for you, you say thank you, right? If you're a halfway decent person, so you acknowledge when people do nice things for you. It's not a particularly elevated way of saying thank you. It's something that, you hope, good parents instill in their children. And it's something we shouldn't take for granted, but that's one form of saying thank you. You give me something, I say thank you. But there's a higher form of gratitude, which is not gratitude as compensation, it's gratitude as consecration. Gratitude as consecration is when you have been so fundamentally shaped by the person or being that you're thanking, that even if they haven't done something nice for you, or even if you can't think of anything in particular that they've done for you, you are called from the very depths of your soul to say thank you anyway, just out of an abundance of recognition that you have been shaped by this relationship. And that's what Leah does, meaning she's had a tough life. You kind of read through the book of Genesis. Leah is in a loveless marriage. She has a hard, she has a difficult relationship with her father, a difficult relationship with her husband, and notwithstanding everything that she tries, she can't have that idyllic family life that she's seeking and that she craves. And yet she exemplifies this incredible ability to recognize the good things in her life, notwithstanding the tough things. And so she says thank you out of that sense that good things have come her way, whether she can recognize it now or not. And so I think now, if we think about what is at least Hebrew biblical perspective on how we should think about gratitude, especially in this moment in time, I think we need not less gratitude as compensation, but we certainly need more gratitude as consecration. We need more of a sense that there are people around us who, even if they haven't done something nice for us lately, even if we're living through a difficult time, a time where we're lonely, we feel polarized, we feel cut off from others, maybe we feel angry towards others, there are still people in our lives, maybe even our own countrymen, maybe people from whom we felt alienated over the course of the last couple of weeks and this election season, who really have shaped us nevertheless. We need more gratitude as consecration if we're going to move forward as a society.
Well, Bishop, I I'll be very surprised if you can outpreach the rabbi, but you're up.
Well, I should say, by the way, I have learned so much from listening to and talking with Bishop Stearns, really one of the great thinkers of our time. So I am chuffed as anything to be on this.
That's the truth.
Well, you're both overly kind, and as they say, the check is in the mail. But listen, it's wonderful to be with both of you. You are both dear friends, and I honestly can't think two people I'd rather just sit down and have dinner with. So this is great fun tonight, and it's wonderful, and so thankful to the Joshua Project for bringing us together. And Johnnie, your work is just so important, and I know you've got your new book coming out, and we're all looking forward to focusing on that as you help point us towards what's happening with Christian persecution around the world. It's such an important topic. So, but it's wonderful to be with both of you tonight. Gosh, yeah, where to begin? I think that the good rabbi raises some fantastic points, and I think every parent, right, you're struggling from the youngest moments of your children to just mold them, your please and your thank yous. You're wanting to instill those manners into your kids, and why is that such a part of the warp and woof of our existence? Why is that like seemingly so innate? And I was brought to this story that Jesus brings to our attention in Luke chapter 17. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, and he encounters these 10 lepers who are, of course, at that moment in time, this disease is ravaging that part of the world, and it was a plague, and they were ostracized, and it was essentially a death sentence, really. And Jesus miraculously heals these 10 lepers. But the story, it's interesting because there's a lot of healing stories of Jesus, but here's this particular thing that happens. It says, Jesus says, go, be made whole, show yourself to the priests, be cleansed. And then verse 15 of chapter 17, it says, one of them, as he saw that he was healed, came back, praising God in thanksgiving, and threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And then Jesus, you can almost hear the irony of this story. Jesus says, weren't there 10 who were cleansed? And yet there's only one, who has returned. And so this story, while highlighting, the healing power of Jesus, it's really pointing out the fact that there's something in the human condition that tends toward a lack of gratitude. There's something in the human condition that tends toward entitlement, that tends toward just kind of expecting things to be done for one. And so thus, a parent does have to constantly train their children, right? Even into the teenage years, that aspect of gratitude. And we have to check our own hearts and say, am I living in a state of thankfulness? And I think the rabbi's done an incredible job in delineating these two concepts, consecration and, forgive me, I'm blanking.
Compensation, yeah.
Yes. But isn't there really a link in that? Because the thought that comes to me, Rabbi, is that when I'm thanking, the waitress or the waiter at the restaurant, when I'm thanking the person who I should expect, to be doing their job, but I'm going above and beyond and I'm thanking them, there's something there in which I'm affirming the image of God in that person. We're really back to the imago Dei. We're back to, I want to affirm the nobleness of that life, the beauty of that life. I want to have a connection that's not simply transactional at the financial level, but is really affirming that human moment. And, not to wax eloquent here, but those moments can become sacred. Those little moments throughout our day where we allow our humanity to be expressed with a sense of beauty, a sense of affirmation, a sense of that extra smile. I think the message of Jesus here is that doesn't come naturally to us. That's the minority action. And yet it's so important because it is how we sanctify time, we sanctify the people around us, and we affirm the image of God in which everyone else that we connect to is created, and that service that comes to us, that act that is performed, those goods that are exchanged, even that is an expression of the goodness of God. And in this day where politics aside, first of all, Johnny, is it possible to put politics aside? It feels impossible.
No, we have to ask the rabbi if God still parts Red Seas.
Exactly.
There's a backlog.
Exactly. So, but trying to put politics aside, it really is about that issue of, are we going to be a culture of entitlement, which really is based on a self-centered, kind of me-centered consumerism mentality, or by this simple act of gratitude to God, and that gratitude expressed toward the image of God in every human being that we interact with, I think puts us in a place where we view ourselves as part of the beautiful family of God, and creates opportunity for a deeper sanctification of the presence of God as we go throughout our day.
So I want to ask those that are watching us to do two things as we're having this conversation. So, the first one is, if you have a question and you're here in the Zoom world, why don't you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen and send us the question, and we'll try to answer a couple of questions. And maybe if you're on social media, you just want to put it as a comment in Facebook, and maybe someone will be kind enough to take that question and throw it in Zoom so we can see it here. But the second thing is, as we're going through this conversation this evening, if you just want to put in the comments or reply to the Twitter live stream or on YouTube in the comments or on Facebook, just something that you're grateful for. I am grateful for this. I think that would be an incredibly uplifting experience in this crazy 2020 that we're living in. If I were not leading this conversation, I would put, I'm grateful that my daughter lost her first tooth tonight, because she just lit up the whole room. She's
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Thank you. It was just the joy, and my other little ones were celebrating that she had lost her, and it just, nothing else mattered.
Johnny, Rabbi, is there a blessing for that? Is there a blessing for the first
blessing for everything?
That's right.
There actually is is this the first tooth that she lost?
The first tooth, yeah.
So when something brand new happens, that's wonderful. The blessing we typically recite in the Jewish tradition is Shehachiyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh, that God has given us life and brought us and established us in this incredible moment. It's something we recite when we're excited, and I can tell by your whole demeanor that this is incredibly exciting.
It was a little thing, but it brings so much joy. And this is the thing, Rabbi Lamm, maybe, and then Bishop, jump in here. But what does gratitude do to us? Right? Rabbi, you're talking about the way in which we're grateful, and if we're sort of, to use imperfect words, sort of, it becomes instinctual to be grateful. It comes from a different place than we have to think about being grateful. But when you do express gratitude, whether it's to God or to our fellow men and women in our lives, what does it do to us? How does it affect us as human beings? Does it change us?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I think one way to approach that is to notice that even though it seems so natural to us to say thank you from sort of a common sense, normal person perspective, like someone gives you something, you say thank you, you acknowledge it, and yet most of us, as we traverse the paths of our lives, I think can perceive that actually ingratitude is much more the norm than gratitude. You're much more likely to encounter, or at least to notice, when people aren't grateful for the things that they get. And I think the question is, why should ingratitude, even though it seems so absurd, why should that be either the norm or at least something that happens so frequently? And I think it comes back to the question of, and I loved how Bishop Stearns put it, when you thank somebody, you're establishing a connection with them. Mm-hmm. And it's so critical to recognize that, because what that means is that when you thank somebody, you are in a certain sense saying, I am dependent upon you.
Mm.
And I think we so often feel that making ourselves dependent, making ourselves vulnerable is a way of showing weakness. And in particular, you know, in a culture like ours, I mean, America has this wonderful, in many ways, wonderful tradition of individualism that's allowed us to do and to accomplish great things. And there are exalted forms of this. You know, you can find it in some of the poetry of Walt Whitman or in the writings of Thoreau. But there is a dark underbelly to this that I think we all recognize over the course of our lives. And we, of course, as recipients of revelation, are charged with being the repository of sanity and sanctity in this kind of culture, and our culture will be the better for it. I think it's our responsibility to call out our fellow citizens, our fellow human beings, and say, needing other people, being dependent on others is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of great strength. That's where family comes from. That's where community comes from. That's where nations come from. That's what allows us to accomplish the incredible things we're able to. And so I think, you know, what does it do to a person to say thank you? On the one hand, you know, it diminishes you in a certain way, but I think it diminishes us actually in the best way, because it creates those dependencies. It shows, you know, there's this wonderful tradition that I identify sort of in the Jewish world. I sort of identify it with the Hasidic world, but it has roots that go earlier than that, which is that when you have guests over for Shabbat, for the Sabbath meal, the host is supposed to spill some wine on the tablecloth and get it dirty to show everybody else that it's okay if they spill on the table, right?
Don't tell my kids that. Don't tell my kids.
As my wife has said to me many times, oh, you're very, very strict about that particular custom, it seems. You know? So, but I love that idea of when you thank someone and show that you're vulnerable, you're not just making yourself vulnerable, you're showing others that it's okay for them to be vulnerable. And I think they're being wonderful about that.
Yeah, it just kind of, we live in a very tense time, don't we? I mean, it just seems like the pressure is on all the time, and it's really hard to just be a human being, you know, and to feel like you have space to be a human being. And such a subtle action that means a lot when somebody's visiting your home, or, you know. And when you're talking, Rabbi, someone I'm sure Bishop Stearns admires as I do, you know, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, may his memory be a blessing. He says in his last book, he talks a lot about the we versus the I, right? I mean, the individualistic, you know, the downside of individualism versus, for most of human history, we lived in community, right? And in community, when someone did something that was worth gratitude and others saw that person receive the gratitude, it kind of has the peer pressure going in the right direction, right? And Bishop, it seems to me that Christianity, when you read the Christian scriptures, I mean, you see a lot of this, like, community, living together, sharing life together, all of these things, you know, but I don't see that very often, you know, these days.
You know, Johnny, you literally went exactly where I was going. That was exactly where I was about to go. Was, you know, I think that those of us who have had the blessing of interacting closely with our Jewish brothers and sisters and seeing the power of Jewish faith lived out in community, those of us from an evangelical background, it really has exposed a certain weakness within our faith construct. And any, you know, a strength, generally speaking, has a corresponding weakness, right? Like there's always the give and take of this. And so evangelicalism, people always, especially Jewish leaders, how has evangelicalism grown? And I always have the same answer. I say, number one, we're a religion of the heart. You know, there's not a lot of trappings. There's not a lot of, you know, liturgy or hierarchy, or, you know, we're a religion of the heart. And I say, number two, we've got great music. We've got the best music. So that's how we've grown. But something I've started, a sacred cow I've begun tipping over in my preaching, and Johnny, you'll relate to this, is this concept of my personal relationship with Jesus. You know, this is very much the hallmark of a recent American evangelicalism, let's say, at least going back to kind of Billy Sunday on forward. It's this concept, you know, I'm going to pray a prayer about my personal relationship with Jesus. And of course, we understand that and we affirm that sense of connection in that way. However, everything we study in Scripture, you know, including the Christian scriptures, you know, can you say that you love God and you have aught with your brother? You know, and Judaism teaches us the us. Judaism teaches us the we. And even Jesus' prayer, Jesus' disciple, Lord, teach us to pray, was what? Our Father, give us this day. It was a communal response. And so that immediate mindset that places oneself in a construct that says my faith, my walk with God, while it certainly is individual, it only can really grow and be verified and be authenticated and be deepened in the context of a community of faith. And that requires having thankfulness, having gratitude, having, you know, interactions, you know, etc. And then I just wanted to point out one other kind of corresponding thing from what you led with a moment ago, where you said kind of what are the benefits of gratitude. And, you know, one of the things, you know, COVID has been such a crazy time. And what happened is all of a sudden we've all become televangelists, right? Like overnight, we're all televangelists because of COVID. So we began
to finally come around to televangelism. You know?
Exactly, right? So we've started this wonderful thing called Torah Tuesdays at 12. And we have this wonderful friend, Mark Gerson. If you all don't know Mark Gerson, he's at the Rabbi's husband.com. He's an amazing thought leader, an incredible leader. But one of the things Mark has been bringing out in our Tuesday classes is how much of Scripture the social sciences are now empirically validating. And so now the social sciences, psychology, will tell us that one of the signs of emotional health is an overall sense of gratitude. When people live in gratitude, when they construct their reality with a sense of gratitude, they are happier people. They are more fulfilled people. And you can just prime the pump of gratitude and just, you know, deliberately begin your day. Psychologists tell you, wake up and say 5 things you're grateful for. And even though that's not a faith construct, it proves out the word of God. Every single morning, my children, the first words out of my mouth, they are every morning, this is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. And I'm just, you know, just scripting them with that reality. Today is a gift. So just to summarize those two things, I absolutely agree with what you're reminding us, that the great and beautiful soul, Rabbi Sachs, you know, taught us in some of his last teachings, was that, you know, there's a power and a depth to faith when we embrace the communal we, us aspect of that. And that lends itself and it finds itself in gratitude one toward another. And then, yes, the social sciences are now proving out Scripture, including the fact if we want to live happier, more productive, more psychologically attuned lives, we just adopt an attitude of gratitude.
You know, by the way, I'll tell you, Bishop, a friend of mine, Tal Ben Shachar, he's a wonderful thinker. He created the field of happiness studies. He's a pioneer in positive psychology. He taught the most popular course in the history of Harvard. Wonderful guy. He pointed out to me that the first prayer that Jews recite every morning is called Modeh Ani, where I say, I am thankful to God. He pointed out that syntactically, grammatically, it seems to be a mistake. Because if you were speaking Hebrew, what you really should say is not Modeh Ani, you should say Ani Modeh. Ani means I, Modeh means thankful. I am thankful to God.
Right.
That's how you should say it. So why do we say it backwards? It's so cockamamie. He says, because the first word out of your mouth every morning, as you just said, Bishop, has to be thank you. And I always thought that was so powerful. Well,
isn't it, Rabbi? Isn't it actually that prayer, if we translate it, it would say, thankful am I, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
It's very Yoda-like, right? Thankful am I. So Rabbi Penny Dunner from Beverly Hills Synagogue, he was just a guest on my podcast, The Bishop and the Rabbi, and he gave that teaching. And he said, the result of that is, as Jews, we are taught to thank before we think. Thank before you think. The first, when you wake up in the morning, you say that prayer instantly, and then the thoughts of your, flood your mind. But you thank before you think, and that sets you in the right course for the day.
So you guys are already, improving my life, I have to tell you, because there's a prayer that I just pray to myself, most mornings, which is, it's, God, this day is your day. It's not my day. God, my time is your time. It's not my time. God, my family is your family. It's not my family. But there's no gratitude in there. And so I'm gonna add a line at the top. Thank you for all these things. Okay, I got something to say. I got a tough question. With these two esteemed members of the clergy, two different religions. This is very sorry for my candor. Okay, but this is 2020. So all this talk about gratitude, and we're in a pandemic. A lot of people are, still looking for jobs in the aftermath of the economic crisis. We have political division everywhere. We have multiple parts of the world that are at war or teetering at war. I mean, there is suffering in every direction. Even this morning, I was joking with some of my colleagues. And I noticed that they put the Christmas tree up in Rockefeller Center, and it's just like the ugliest Christmas tree I've ever seen. It's like part of the tree is off of the. It's like, couldn't we have just gotten the Christmas tree right? In 2020, it just seems like this is one of those years where nothing is working. And so here we are tonight, choosing to talk about gratitude, when I'm sure there are a lot of people listening to us, or a lot of people that will listen or watch this later on, and the last thing on their mind is being grateful for anything. And if they're going to be grateful, they're going to grit their teeth and they're going to do it out of obligation, but they don't feel very grateful looking around at what's happening. Like, what do the scriptures have to say to people like that are watching us tonight?
What a powerful, powerful question. What a powerful question. Well, first of all, it's important to validate the question, which is, if that's how you feel at a moment like this, then it's important to be able to feel those feelings. Those are serious challenges to grapple with, and we must be deeply, extraordinarily careful of not being like Job's friends and telling him how to deal with and cope with his suffering. That's the first point. But I think there is a ray of light here. Most people don't realize, when you think about Thanksgiving, right? It's sort of the sort of the highest occasion of the American football season, typically, right? But when people think about it, we associate it with the Pilgrims and so forth. The first official Thanksgiving proclaimed by the United States government was proclaimed by President Lincoln in 1863, as the Civil War raged around us, as bodies piled high at the Battle of Antietam, the Battle of Gettysburg, some of the bloodiest single days in American history. I mean, casualties that rivaled the entire Vietnam War. And at this moment, at the depths of this real and true and terrible suffering, President Lincoln said, now's the time to give thanks to the Almighty. Why? How? I mean, you asked the question and you put it so well, Reverend. It seems to me, not to speak for President Lincoln, but it seems to me that here a wonderful biblical doctrine, which has almost no parallel in the modern period, is actually important here. And that's the doctrine of chosenness. And chosenness is a much misunderstood doctrine. When I often encounter people who aren't familiar with the Jewish tradition, so to the extent that they know that Jews kind of claim to be the chosen people, or that the Israelites talk about themselves as the chosen people, I think it smacks of a sense of superiority, of smugness, something like that. And the truth is, I understand that. But what makes chosenness so important is that in the Hebrew Bible, chosenness is actually not a privilege. On the contrary, God promises the Israelites, if you are chosen, you will suffer for it. It will be a burden around your neck. You will be ma'at mikol ha'amim. You will be the least of all the nations. And in fact, there's this wonderful rabbinic tradition that says that how did God choose the Israelites? Because they were great, because they were smart, because they were big, because they were large? No, it was a lottery, right? God kind of ran this lotto machine, and all the angels chose different nations, and God picked Abraham out of the hat and said, all right, I guess I'm stuck with this guy now, right? And what it bespeaks is this deep conviction on the part of Jewish thinkers for centuries that chosenness is not a privilege, it's a responsibility. What it means is that no matter what you're going through, no matter how difficult it may be or how inconvenient it may be or how painful it may be to represent your values across the world, you have to do it anyway because that's your responsibility. Now, we as a nation, President Lincoln also, in a wonderful turn of phrase, referred to Americans as an almost chosen people. And I think we do have this sense, and I think it's justified, that America does have a special purpose and destiny in the world. We have this sense of almost chosenness. And what that means, as President Lincoln knew when he proclaimed a day of Thanksgiving in the depths of a civil war, is that at the end of the day, whether we're fighting, we're feuding with each other, we do have certain principles to which we must live up, and for which we must serve as a beacon to all the nations of the earth. And we do it not because it feels good, not because it's cathartic, not because this is the right time for it, but because that's what it means to be an almost chosen people. That's what it means to have responsibilities. So why say thank you in a year like 2020? Well, I think at the end of the day, the answer is, and again, if it is too difficult for a person, I would understand. But part of the sacred, holy, and wonderful opportunity we have now as Americans is to say the whole world is looking for a reason to say thank you. And someone needs to stand up and take that first step. And we have the responsibility, we have, and in many ways, the blessing of being able to say we can be the ones to stand up and make that first thank you.
Brilliant. Bishop.
You're not gonna make me follow up that, are you?
I keep doing it, you notice.
That is profound, and it's beautiful, and just love being with both of you. It's just life-giving and touches the soul.
But this, Bishop, is why a lot of people come to a place of worship. Yeah, if it's someone that goes back to synagogue after a long period of time, or decides to practice their Judaism, or if it's someone who grew up in a Christian family and sort of went off, and then one Sunday they decide to sneak into the back and sit in the back of the room. It's kind of never the easy questions which cause that, right? I mean, it's the hard questions. This is a hard one.
And for me, I think it comes down to, and I'm right with Rabbi. We need to acknowledge those questions. We need to give. There's a level of sacredness, right, to that question, and we want to affirm the person in that valley. And each of us have encountered these dark nights of the soul where, one of my early rabbinic mentors, who I just cherish his memory, he was so foundational in my life when I started in this work of Jewish Christian understanding, Rabbi Gerald Meister. And he was a Brit. He was from Great Britain, and he had this really thick British accent. And I absolutely, telling you the truth, he looked identical to Alfred Hitchcock. And so he would get up to speak, and he'd say, "Good evening," and the place would be in stitches before he got started. But Rabbi Meister would say to me, he'd say, "Don't trust any spiritual leader who doesn't have a deep spiritual crisis of faith at least once every 5 to 10 years, because then you're not wrestling with God. We don't want pat answers. We don't want superficial answers. At the same time, there's a place where you can't stay in the dust forever. You've got to address this. And for me, what it goes to is this. I go back to the quintessential song of the children of Israel in the midst of the desert. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov ki leolam chazdo. For the Lord is good and his mercy endures forever. And so what these circumstances that we go through call from the depths of our being, at the cellular level, are we going to believe God? We don't see it right now. We don't feel it right now. We don't understand it right now. But you are good. And this trial, this difficulty, this dark night, even this is an expression of your mercy. Even this is an expression of your kindness. And I will face this with faith, because on the other side of this, I'm laying hold of the blessing of God. Last night, I read through every evening the proverb for the day with my children. So we were on Proverbs 16, and it said, the Lord works everything out for his own purpose, even the wicked for the day of disaster. And this concept, I was so proud of my 13-year-olds, because I said, we're also working our way through the Lord of the Rings movies. And I said,
Another sacred text.
What's that?
Another sacred text.
Exactly. So I said, find me that verse. I said, so the Lord works everything out for his purpose, even the wicked for the day of disaster. I said $10. I don't know, Rabbi, you have to tell me if monetizing, learning is a bad thing. But I said $10 to whoever can tell me where that is from Lord of the Rings. And my 13-year-old, he jumped up and he said it's when Gollum bites off Frodo's finger, and in biting off his finger, the rain falls, right? Because Frodo wasn't gonna. So, and even evil at the end worked towards the destruction of evil. And so somehow, how do we do this? I don't know, because yes, the world is going crazy, and I'm preaching to myself, and we have to remind ourselves of this all the time. And that's why, and I'll just close with this thought. That's why, Johnny, you just said, it comes back to worship. There is I could tear up. There's a phrase in the book of Psalms, and I come to it over and over again. And King David is lamenting, the wicked are prospering and everything's going terrible. And then there's this beautiful phrase. King David says, until I entered the sanctuary of God. And when you enter the sanctuary of God and you get a glimpse, and how do we get there? Through gratitude, through praise, through worship, through that affirmation of the good God, you are good and your mercy endures forever. Until I entered the sanctuary of God. And then in a moment, my perspective changed. And I saw how COVID and this election and the painful racial issues that are fomenting all of this, God, somehow on the other side of this, you have none of this has caught you by surprise, God. You are the architect of history. You dwell outside of time, and we can trust your goodness over the midst of this. It's the only way I know how to live, because otherwise you kind of, it's a curse God and die kind of thing. There really is, we're either going to find meaning and sanctity and hope in the midst of this, or it's all oblivion. And so we as people of faith need to remind ourselves and need to remind those who we look to that everything is working according to God's plan, even when we don't feel it.
This I don't remember who it was. So maybe I should have paid closer attention in seminary. But there was a Christian writer, might have been C.S. Lewis. I don't remember. But we have a tendency, Rabbi, if we don't remember who said something, we just attribute it to C.S. Lewis. But there was, I read somewhere, if we could understand God, then he would not be God. And the most important question to ask ourselves in difficult times is not why. It's a different question. It's who. Who created the world? Who has given us these tools to navigate through it, whether it's facing the Red Sea or on the other side of it, or whatever the situation is. This has been such a great conversation, and when we have plenty of more time, and I'm trying to integrate some of the questions and comments in my own questioning here. But I have to take a minute and I have to ask the two of you, Rabbi Lamm, coming from the family that you have come from, what a blessing from God to have that lineage, and to have served in the places that you've served, and now at B'nai Zion. Bishop Stearns, the groundbreaking work that you've done, not just in building a bridge between the Christian and the Jewish community, but you've worked on the really, really hard issues of clergy learning to trust one another, of rabbis and pastors breaking bread together, and of young people, young evangelicals that do not think the same about Israel still, while totally supportive of the state of Israel. Comparatively speaking to their peers, there's been a diminishment. And part of that is, I was talking to an 80-year-old evangelical friend of mine who remembered his father pulling him to the radio when the state of Israel was formed and hearing the count. And it was an amazing experience, because I've talked to so many Jewish friends of mine that had the same memory, and to see the same thing. But Bishop, you've worked in those hard issues. I think some of our fathers and our grandfathers, would have found it utterly impossible to have this moment of Jewish Christian cooperation, and evangelical Christian cooperation. I'd like to hear both of you reflect on that, and maybe reflect on it in this way, to deepen it even further. Rabbi, as a rabbi, is there something that you wish that the Christian community understood more about the Jewish community? Or Bishop, vice versa, that the Jewish community understood about the Christian community? But even before you answer that simple but not so simple question, maybe just reflect for a moment on the relationship between the Jewish and Christian community in the world that we're living in today.
If I can, I'll tell you a story. It's not my story. It's a story that occurred to a wonderful man whom I befriended a couple of years ago, who survived the Holocaust. The man's name was Yaakov. He was liberated from the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. The Bergen-Belsen concentration camp was particularly hellish because it was used by the Nazis as a sort of Potemkin village. It was a way to it was a place where they would bring in foreign press, and they would force the inmates to parade around, and then they would show them, oh, see, look how wonderfully we're treating these people. All the while, of course, there's hunger and privation and murder and other things we shouldn't even speak of. And he said to me, it was almost one of the first times I met him. Yaakov said to me, I want to tell you about my bar mitzvah in Bergen-Belsen. So for those who are not familiar, there is a Jewish custom that, when you come of age, that ceremony for young men, it's 13, and the tradition for younger women, it's at age 12, at least in the Orthodox tradition. So Yaakov came of age, became a 13-year-old while he was in Bergen-Belsen. And he said the Nazis got it into their heads that they wanted to show foreign folks that they were treating the Jews well. So they said, listen, we're going to have a mass bar mitzvah for all the young men in the camp. And so what they did was they approached the young men and they said, we want you to kind of show the foreign press that you're going to have a bar mitzvah. If you agree, we'll give you a loaf of bread, an extra loaf of bread. And Yaakov said, at that moment in the war, at that time in World War II, for a loaf of bread, you could have bought a penthouse in Budapest. And if you refuse, we'll starve you. And Yaakov said, I would have taken, he says, anyone who's really experienced hunger will tell you, I would take 100 beatings over starvation, because there's nothing worse than starvation. He says, so we all said yes. And he said, it haunted me for years that I said yes. But he said, in any event, what happened was we said yes. And parenthetically, he said, my mother, I gave the loaf of bread to her. And instead of feeding our family, she used that money to buy a prayer book and a Talmud and a Bible. And he said, when she passed away, I looked to the heavens and I said, whatever this woman has done in her life, with that loaf of bread, she purchased her way into the Garden of Eden, into the afterlife. So he says, the Nazis brought this, they got a Torah scroll, small Torah scroll, and they had everybody line up around the barracks. And anyone who was a bar mitzvah, anyone who was of the age or was in their family, got to read from the Torah. They said, we hadn't seen a Torah in years. They said, and that day we said everyone was related to us. Everyone got to read from the Torah. And he said, listen, I was always ashamed for years that I had taken a deal, and we all were. So years passed, you survive the war, you build a new life if you're fortunate. He said, I would still think about it every now and then, but that was that. Then I heard about the Israeli astronaut, Ilan Ramon. Ilan Ramon was one of the first Israeli astronauts in space. He may have even been the first. He was killed when their ship, upon re-entry to the atmosphere, there was a terrible accident and he was killed. He said, I read in the newspaper, and this is true, that on board that spaceship, Ilan Ramon had with him that Torah scroll from Bergen-Belsen. And he said, as soon as I found that out, he says, I wasn't surprised at all. He says, because that Torah scroll was so holy that God himself took it up to the heavens so that he could read from it himself. Mm. And he said to me, when he told me this story, he said, think about this. Think about how far that Torah scroll went, from the depths of the concentration camps in Nazi Germany to the moon. He says, that's where the Jewish people have come in the last several decades. We've gone from the depths of hell to the heavens themselves. And I think about that story often when I think about the kinds of conversation we're having now, which is there has been a long history of enmity, or there may be other complex words that you could use, of enmity between Jews and Christians. And more often than not, when Jews, at least those Jews from Europe, have been tormented, their tormentors were wearing crosses. Yeah. But at the same time, anti-Semitism has been around for 3,000 years. It's the oldest hatred in the history of humanity, and it's going to be around for the next 3,000 years. The question is, what's new in Jewish history? And I think what's new is that for the first time, we've taken that Torah scroll from the concentration camps to the moon. For the first time in history, there is not only hatred of the Jewish people, but organized love of the Jewish people. And it is spearheaded almost entirely by people of faith, Americans of faith, and people of faith across the world, in South America, in Africa. I mean, it's astounding. And so the way that I think about it is, part of Hebrew biblical history, of the Hebrew biblical notion of history, is that you actually don't try to repeat the past. Right? King David doesn't try to be Moses. Josiah doesn't try to be King David. They all forge their own path based on the values and the opportunities they have at that moment. And this is one such time for us. It's true, there's a history between us, and we shouldn't forget it, and we shouldn't erase it. It should be acknowledged, and it should be felt. But we have an unparalleled, unprecedented opportunity to build true friendships based not on trying to become the same as each other, not trying to homogenize ourselves into each other. We actually can bring, for the first time in human history, people such as ours can come with our unique selves, with our unique traditions, and actually stand shoulder to shoulder and build a better, more beautiful, more virtuous world together. And to me, that is, if there is an opportunity that was worth celebrating in the last 1,000 years, this is it.
Amen. Bishop.
It is literally almost a daily miracle to reflect upon the fact that for 2,000 years, this conversation has not happened. And, here I am tonight, honored to be hosted by Rabbi Lamm and the incredible work of B'nai Zion, which, by the way, I have a relationship with B'nai Zion going back, several years, and I've known of the great work of B'nai Zion and been a part of it. Last night, I had the privilege of speaking to the World Jewish Congress. It's almost every day, and this is happening globally. This is happening, as rabbis just reminded us, it's happening in Brazil. I just got back from South Korea, and just before COVID, and saw all over the world. It really is a phenomenon. I mean, sociologists need to write about this. This is mind-blowing that after 2,000 years, and Rabbi is very kind in his choosing of the words, but I, as a Christian, will say it. I mean, 2,000 years of Jewish-Christian relations have shown the Jews that they shouldn't trust Christians. That, Christianity has been horrific in its treatment of the Jews. However, there is this new brand of Christianity with a philo-Semitic theological construct that is now in its ascendancy globally, if you want to call it evangelical Christianity, Bible-believing Christianity, whatever. It's not the mainline Christianity that sprung out of a Constantinian, Nicene summit. It's a Christianity that really, in many ways, marks its trajectory with the American experience. And now there's about 600 million evangelicals around the world. I think if there was one thing, Johnny, I think you said, if there's one thing you wish the other could hear or could know, the one thing I would say to our Jewish friends is that, we still have a long way to go in our cross-cultural nuances and in our cultural politeness. There's a lot of ignorance we've got to overcome. We're still working through all of our questions of eschatology and give us some time. We're catching up. There's a lot of work to be done. But I would say to our Jewish friends this, and it was really, I'll reference again my dear friend Mark Gerson, because these are his words, not C.S. Lewis's. But Mark Gerson stood on a stage with me not long ago and said, you know what, thousands and thousands of years ago, Balaam was paid to pronounce a prophetic curse over the Jewish people. And, he couldn't curse them because they were blessed, et cetera, et cetera. He said, but Balaam pronounced something that really was akin to a curse. He said, the Jewish people are alone and exist, alone, apart from any other people. And Mark said, he said, for the first time in history, I believe that prophecy is no longer true. And what I would say to our Jewish friends is that if we never agree on politics, if we never agree on theology, if we never agree on these things, we will stand with the Jewish people now and forever. And we will stand, God forbid, there should ever be any type of persecution akin to what the Jewish people have gone through, but we will stand with you with our lives. We pledge to you our lives. The Jewish people, never again will stand alone in history. We have awakened, we are with you, and we are in that Zechariah moment where it says 10 men from the nations will grab hold of the skirt of a Jew, of maybe it's the tzitzit of a Jew, and say, let us go with you, because we have heard that your God is with you. And so, I metaphorically stretch out through the Zoom lens and take a hold of Rabbi Lamm's tzitzit, and I tell you, we are saying, let us go with you. We have heard, we have seen that your God, Hashem, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who has kept his word to 1,000 generations, who's brought you back into Eretz Israel, let us go with you because we have seen and heard that your God is with you. So you're stuck with us. We're not going anywhere.
And consider words like that would have seemed incomprehensible even 3 generations ago. I mean, think about what a time we're living in. I mean, it's remarkable, absolutely remarkable.
And I know there's some people that are wondering why in a discussion on gratitude we ended in this category, but I think it's probably very clear to them. There's something incredibly worth being grateful for in this discussion, and I think this qualified as a compelling conversation, and we're so grateful, Rabbi Lamm, for your facilitating this whole venue for us. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Bishop Stearns, for joining us. And of course, this is shared on, this has been broadcast live on YouTube and Facebook and on Twitter, and share it around, or share bits and pieces of it around until we gather again together. So thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. And when the Joshua Project launches in the next couple of weeks, please stay tuned. It's going to be just fantastic, really. So thank you, gentlemen, both for joining us. It's an honor. It's a pleasure. It's a historic pleasure, and I'm deeply thankful to you both for joining me this evening.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you.